this week's episode of Comics Control, we talk about the new comic from Warren Ellis called Trees. We also talk about Crisis with Crytek, and then we end out discussing charities with video games. All that and more in this episode 24, 420 blazeit. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Comics and Controllers. As always, I'm Kyle, joined by my co-host Steven.
How's it going?
It's going pretty good, Steven. So, what's on the comic front for us today?
Well, I have something a little bit special for you.
Oh.
Because, don't worry. It's by a specific person that I know you have told me that you liked a few stories about also.
Mark Millar?
No, it's not by Mark Millar.
Exactly. You've been listening, because you know I don't.
Yeah, right. But it is a little bit of an odd comic, but I think it's right up your alley, and it is Trees by Warren Ellis.
Yes, good stuff. Warren Ellis, one of probably my favorite comic writer, among other writing things he's done.
I believe that. You've also read, I think we have both read one of his novels, at least, Crooked Little Vein, correct?
Yes, Crooked Little Vein. I can almost assuredly say if it's something that he's written that was independent, comic-wise, or a novel, I've probably read it. I haven't read all of his stuff that he's written for the mainstream comic stuff, like Marvel and DC, but I've read most of his independent things. And
right.
Trees is very Warren Ellis.
Yes, it is. As you have, I haven't read as much of his stuff, but I've read a good bit of it. And as I think we've discussed in the past, he has a very, very particular style. It is not hard to read a comic book that is written by Warren Ellis and pretty quickly figure out that kind of fingerprint is on there. I think it's kind of odd. I believe I was telling you this the other day that I have gotten to the point, and this seems odd to me, but he's a good example of how certain comic book writers, I've actually started to pick out their individual kind of styles with the way that they use cursing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's got some good ones he uses. I mean, in his... probably one of his most famous works from years back, Transmetropolitan. Him and Derek Robertson did that. Robertson was the artist.
Yeah, I love Derek Robertson stuff.
Yeah, it's really good. And it was really good for that series, because that series is kind of like this future dystopia type world, and it's very graphic. And a lot of times, Ellis, when he does things, he doesn't do a lot of... He could do a lot with no dialogue. And he leaves it up to the artist, especially when he's a really good artist. So he just kind of let them go. And that was what he did a lot with that in Robertson. But in there, he has so many weird curse words or ways he curses.
Yeah.
And that occurs in Trees as well.
He's a language magician. He plays with words.
Yeah, he works best when he's not held back by, like, you can't use potty language.
Yeah. So, going to Trees a little bit here, I want to ask you, could you explain the plot of Trees?
Well, I've only read the 2 issues that are out.
Right.
And even after reading those 2 issues, I don't really think you can explain the plot, because they haven't really told us much of what's going on.
That is true.
I mean, the basic that we know is that at some point in the past, these giant things came down to the planet, and they're like trees, and they're from some aliens who, as far as we can tell, the aliens don't consider us intelligent. They just kind of see Earth as like maybe a dumping ground or a staging ground, or maybe they're harvesting the planet. We don't know.
Yeah.
If people do know, it sure hasn't gone into it in the comic, and we sure don't know as readers either.
Right.
Because the comic basically follows people in different places where these trees have been put down and kind of what's going on with them.
Yeah. And this comic does start in medias res. It's in the middle after the aliens have landed and everything. And so people aren't, immediately talking about, oh, well, this is what's going on. There's no large parts of exposition between the characters.
Yeah.
And I think that's good because something I really enjoyed in this was the dialogue. And it makes the dialogue feel much more real, much more fresh. And the characters feel a little bit more real, a little more human.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's another Warren Ellis type thing. Like, he'll create these worlds and these situations that things are going on in, but he wants to focus on the individuals that are involved in it more than, like, the overall plot going on. Like, he'll do stuff like that, too, in stories where there's this massive thing going on in the background, but that's not really what the story's about. It's actually just what's led to the interaction that the characters are going to have that we're going to see and witness. He actually, right now, too, is also writing Moon Knight for Marvel.
Oh, yeah.
And that is also very much his typical kind of type of writing. Because what he does is, like, the second issue of that, basically half the comic goes on before Moon Knight even shows up. Like, Moon Knight is not even really... He's, like, the main character, but it's kind of like... You find out the stories that are going on that he gets involved in, and then you kind of get some of his exposition on the story or what led to this or how he's dealing with it. And every now and then they kind of deal with the crazy that is Moon Knight, because he's a psychopath.
Yeah, if you've never read Moon Knight before, you're kind of in for a treat with that.
Yeah, this is, I think, the fourth volume or third volume. I mean, it's they've had several iterations of it, and the last iteration, he was literally insane. Like, cut some dude's face off insane. They still reference that in this all the time.
Right, because it was the werewolf dude or whatever.
Yeah, it was something crazy.
I can't remember his name.
But, like, with Ellis writing it's a different feel than the other two Moon Knight series have been. And it just uses that. It's not so much... so, talking about dialogue, this is what we'll reference back in, is somebody else has a very type of distinctive dialogue they use is Josh Whedon.
Yeah.
Like, if you watch Buffy or Angel, you can see that same kind of dialogue show up in the Avengers. And it showed up in the Astonishing X-Men when he wrote it, and it showed up in other stuff he's written.
Sure.
He writes dialogue in a very special way. It's that kind of, like, jokes at times, like, everybody's really snarky and things. Ellis can do that, too. And that's one of his styles of dialogue. But his other style of dialogue is much more, I guess, highbrow, or like people really kind of, expounding upon what's going on around them. And that one's usually the one that has much less cursing in it. So that's the one you typically see, like, in Marvel.
Sure. And I will say I have read, not recently, but a while back, there were a ton of comics that you could tell were trying to do Joss Whedon's style of dialogue, because it works. It when done well, it's a fun style of dialogue.
That's the key.
And that's the problem, is like there were a lot of people that you could tell were trying to do more of that style, but either they wouldn't fully commit to it, or they just weren't good at writing that style of dialogue. So a lot of times it would fall flat. I
can see that. But Ellis in Trees, I think this is a typical thing the typical kind of story you get from him. You get one where there's some kind of events happened, and it's world changing, but that's not really what the story's about. The story's about the individuals and how it's affected them. Like, I don't expect a resolution to the Trees. There might be more knowledge about it, but you're not going to get a resolution. It's going to be more about how it's affecting these individuals.
Well, what's neat is they've kind of blended in, obviously, the characters are the main point. You have several kind of cool characters, and unfortunately there's a lot of them, and it's very confusing. It kind of jumps around.
And it's all over the world that is taking place.
This is going to be a hard one to follow. However, they have done a good mix where, even though I agree with you, I think we were discussing, I don't know how long this is going to be, probably somewhere between 12 and 18 issues or something like that.
Yeah, it's got to be, it can't be a 4 or 6 issue, because they're nowhere with it at this point, if it is. But
my point in this is that the characters are going to be the main focal point, but at least they are dealing with the trees even this far into it. Like, there's a part in, I believe, the second issue where someone discusses the strategic value of the tree that's in their country because it's the shortest tree that they can find. Yeah. And that's really neat. It still shows that these trees... The key with something is to put good characters in an interesting world. And one thing this comic does amazingly is world building. The first 2 issues in this are a great example of how to do world building. And as someone who, kind of dabbles in writing and stuff like that, this was a great example of how to not only make your characters interesting, make your world interesting, but they feel like a single unit. There's a feeling I get where all this is connected, and I don't feel like it's like, oh, but this is the people's story, and we're not going to deal with the trees. No, I think we're going to have a good coexisting story here, and I, like you said, it's probably not going to resolve the way most people would want it to resolve, but I think it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Ellis, with a lot of his stories like this, you get these types of characters that you see kind of often in his. Like, there's always, like, the kind of curmudgeonly person who's like, whatever. But they really are trying to do good, but they just are uber antisocial about it. And there's usually somebody who is trying to manipulate the situation and use it for their own good, and they just don't, hey, this is really bad, we need to try to stop it. Whatever, I'll just take advantage of it, and somebody else will try to take care of it. They're that person.
Sure. And
there's usually some kind of super snarky female, if not multiple. Like, all the females in his stuff are snarky.
Yeah.
There's not a non-snarky female.
Or if there is, they have some other trait that seems to...
If they're not snarky, they're typically a bitch. That's basically the best way of putting it.
That was what I was getting at without saying that directly, yes.
Yeah, if they're not snarky, just like, oh, it's the cute girl who's kind of making witty comments and stuff like that. They're just like the horrible bitch that nobody likes.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is that he has these characters that all kind of fit these molds, but within each story, they're different. Like, I can think of, in Transmetropolitan, there were the filthy assistants. Those are his snarky females.
Yes.
And then he has the female main character in Crooked Little Vein. They're very similar characters, but they're different enough that they're different characters, too. There's things about them where it's like, oh, okay, what happens to her in the Crooked Little Vein, it's killing because I can't remember her name, but what happens to that female character, I understand why she's the way she is and what's going on with her, and compared to the filthy assistants in Transmetropolitan, I understand why they do what they do and what their motivations are. So.
Yeah. And I think a lot of even his male characters are incredibly, if they're not snarky, they're very blunt. They're just That's just Ellis. He is just a blunt person.
Oh yeah. I've met him multiple times at conventions, and I've even been in talks where he's you just ask him questions and he's straightforward. Like, people would ask him questions about Alan Moore, and he'd be like, "Well, my daughter calls him Creepy Uncle Alan," and he's like, "But Alan Moore sold all his rights to DC and basically lives on a giant weed farm in England." And this is a friend. Yeah. This is a friend he's talking about.
Right.
He trashes Mark Millar too. But that's the kind of guy he is. Like, you can tell, like, these are his friends, because he does it with Sir Patrick Stewart too, because they're friends.
Right.
They'll talk. They probably are really close, but he doesn't have a problem just saying, "Yeah, boom, this is what you need to know about him. He's high all the time," or he's crazy, or whatever. Yeah. But they probably expect that from him too.
Right. And I remember you told me a story. I think you said you went to something that was like an evening with Uncle Warren or something like that.
Yeah.
That he has some of the craziest stories about, a lot of them are mostly about his friends and stuff like that. But I hear he's an amazing storyteller, even in person.
Oh, he is. So the deal with that was, this was at Heroes Con, which is a comic convention. It's in North Carolina. Heroes Con is kind of like a family convention, though. So it's not like Dragon Con in Atlanta. When Dragon Con in Atlanta goes for 4 days straight. Like, in the middle of the night, it's still going with parties and stuff. Heroes Con is, 10 to 5, 3 days done. But they wanted to do something for him because he flew over and it was a big deal. And so they were like, well, we'll have this late night with Warren Ellis. And so he basically did a little talk on the death of science fiction, which is about 30 minutes. And then for the next like 3.5 hours or 4 hours, he basically just fielded questions from the audience. And some of those questions, like I asked one, I'd heard he had a lot of stories about Sir Patrick Stewart. He told us all these crazy stories about him. And then he told us stories about, Alan Moore and Mark Millar that people would ask. And he also told a story about a writer named Michael Moorcock, who wrote is it the Elric series?
It's the Elric albino Nazi time traveling
elf.
He hunts Nazis.
Yeah.
It's God. Okay. The Herod's bill. That's all I remember. Is he had to pay his Herod's bill.
Yeah, the short story of that is that Michael Moorcock has written a lot of stuff, but his main thing that he's known for is writing this really terrible science fiction series that people just eat up. But he's written really good books too. And so one time
that's the thing people forget. He has actually written good stuff.
One time, Ellis said he was speaking with him about it, and he was like, why do you just write those terrible books? He's like, even you've talked about how bad they are. He's like, I only write one of those when I need to pay a Herod's bill. He's like, because literally I can sit down in a weekend, write it in a day, and send it to my editor, and by the end of the weekend, he's already said okay on it, it's getting published. And they cut him his check, and he just goes and pays his bills with it.
As someone who has written several long projects, I can't imagine. I mean, that amazes me.
Those stories are terrible, so he doesn't have to put effort into it. Like,
I know.
And that's another thing with Ellis, too, talking about writing. You can tell when Ellis is really trying to write something that's got a lot of effort and thought into it. Because there are series that he was part of that took 5 years for 26 issues to come out, like Planetary. Yeah, I mean, sure. Planetary, when it started really fast, but they started reaching a point where it was like, I've got to start putting more and more into this because the story's starting to kind of coalesce, but I'm having a hard time with it. It took him 2 to 3 years to finish the last like 4 to 5 issues of that. And he did it with Transmet too. When he got near the end of Transmetro, he took the time, like a year, to finish up like the last few issues. Because he's like, we need to get this right. I don't want this to end terrible. I want it to be perfect. And so he's wanted that. It's a kind of example. And it took his novels a long time too. Like there were many years between his 2 novels. So it's cool to see that he does that. Like he puts this time into that kind of writing rather than like, oh, I know I can go take a dump and I can write a story, some crap story about the main character from Transmet, and people would just buy it because it's that.
Yeah. Also, there's a lot of stuff that he hasn't finished. Like, I believe I was telling you about a series called New Universal with Marvel. Mm-hmm. That's just one that not only did they never finish, but they actually launched a second, like a branch-off series to it. And I don't think either one, well, the branch-off may have actually finished, but the main story never finished. And I was just so confused.
Yeah. Now, I'll say this. Typically, if he's doing an independent thing, he'll finish it. It may take years. But a lot of times with stuff like that for Marvel, it's not so much him not finishing it. It's them just not wanting more.
That may be the case.
Because Universal sales were terrible. I remember that.
I have just heard that he is really bad with deadlines.
No, he is bad with deadlines.
Yeah. And I've heard that a lot of people, have been like, oh, we want more of this from you, and either they have to wait, like you said, they have to wait an extraordinary amount of time, or they just, like you said, they just cancel it. And Marvel and DC are companies that would do that.
Well, I think this is kind of what happens with him, because he writes other than like comics and books. He's also written tons of TV show, a script for an episode here or there, and for cartoons and TV shows and other things, and he does a lot of stuff like that. And when he gets really bogged down at work, he just won't tour. Like, I don't think he's gone to conventions for several years. Like, he'll go on hiatus for 3 to 4 years before you see him pop back up. And then when he does, he does like a huge convention run for like a year and a half, and then he probably hates society again and goes back to his pub and starts smoking and drinking and writing. Yeah. But I think when that happens is that if he says he's like working on like a TV show or a script like that, those have much stricter deadlines. And because of that, I think he puts a lot more effort in getting that written out and getting that out faster. And then when he does his independent work, most of those places, they don't want you to say, here's the first issue, let's do the rest. They want the entire thing. And so when that happens, I think he then works on that. And I think the last thing he's really worried about is the stuff that comes out of Marvel and DC, because he knows they'll push back because they don't care.
Yeah.
You know, his books probably come very last because he'll take the time because there's not a super deadline on those.
Right. Yeah. And I think anyone asking him to write a book knows you're going to be waiting a while.
Yeah. I mean, he's done 2, and they've both done fairly well, but they took a while to get out, and they took a while to actually, between the 2.
Yeah. And Crooked Little Vein is not a long book. It's good, but it's not like a thick book or anything.
The other one's called Gun Machine, and it's not a long book either. It's fairly short, but they're short, but they're not easy reading books, if that makes sense. Like, there's a lot of weird content in there, and sometimes you got to really think about. And there's a lot of verbose writing. So
yeah, and going back to Trees briefly, for a moment, like when you're talking about not a lot of verbose writing, something that I've noticed in this book, and also kind of noticed with some of his past stuff too, and I think you even pointed this out about Transmit, that there are some pages with a lot of negative art space, and negative art space is just where you have like a big like landscape or whatever.
Man,
it's fine because it helps with the world building, and the art is not bad. I'm not the biggest fan of.
There are pages in the new Moon Knight that he's writing, not pages, but panels on pages that are white, no color, nothing, which I'm like, you don't see that too often. They usually at least like want something in every panel, like even if it's just darkening, pure white, like they didn't print anything.
That is odd.
Very little words. Like I think that's the thing with his writing in a book and his writing in a comic, is that in a comic, if you're reading a comic, you don't get to see the script. You just get to see what the artist took from the script and then the words that the writer wanted put in.
Right.
And so you don't get to see his crazy long descriptions that he's done. And I've read, because I remember reading some of his that he had written, I think it was for like later Transmet issues. His scripts were huge compared to other people's scripts, He's very detailed, and you see that in his books. But when you look at the comics, you're like, there's not a lot of words in this. It's because they're all in descriptions that you don't see because the artist took those descriptions and they put them in here the way we wanted them. I think that's a hard part for a lot of people who write comics, is pacing panels and actually telling a story and doing it without it becoming a novel.
Right.
That to me is what the problem with Brian Michael Bendis is. Like, I know a Bendis book, like I don't even have to see who the author is. If I open up and like half the pages are just full of bubbles of text.
He's verbose, man.
He's too verbose.
Has a lot to say. He is too verbose in some things. Like when he first started doing his massive run on Avengers, there were a couple issues I was like, okay, I felt like I read like a really short book, because there's just a lot of it.
It's like most like comics I can read fairly quickly, but if I'm taking a long time to read a single issue, I'm like, this must be a Bendis book because there's just so much text in here. You can usually skip a lot of it too, because usually it's just like it's garbage.
Well, one thing that Bendis is really into, especially if you read some of the new X-Men stuff and all that, is he's really into character development, and he does that with character conversations. His main form of character development is to put two characters in a room by themselves and force them to have a conversation that they wouldn't have had in a casual situation or something like that. And it works sometimes, and sometimes it just falls flat.
But the dialogue is still too long, and it's obvious to me too that he's overly verbose, because when they had him come on the E3 thing for the PS, for Sony, and talk about powers, I was like, dude, get to the point. You are just running your mouth. You are losing the audience. The average person watching this doesn't even know who you are, and they don't even care.
That I like Bendis. I like Bendis a lot. I don't know why they put him up there.
Yeah, I felt that was a very poor decision on their end. But we digress.
Yeah. The last thing I really want to say about Trees, and just to be kind of pointed about some of the stuff, is that the art is good, the color palette's fine, the characters are varied enough. I think my biggest thing is that the issues feel very short because of that negative space and because of how quick some of the scenes are. There's a lot of cool, interesting stuff going on. I'm going to keep reading it. It's just, it has this epic feel and a natural tension to it that makes me want to know more, that makes me want to see what's going to happen. But at the same time, I'm really hoping I'm not going to end the series, which I have often done with some Ellis' stuff, where I'm like, okay, there wasn't enough. I needed more, you know?
In some of his stuff, it is like that, but I think it's purposely written like that. To give you a kind of a final example of something typical in his writing where he leaves you wanting more, or he doesn't leave you with the ending you wanted, which I think is what people are going to get with Trees and be pissed.
Right.
He wrote a comic, I think it was called Ministry of Space, or Orbiter. I think it was something like Orbiter or Ministry of Space. I think it had two names depending on where it was released, because it was released in the UK and over here.
Yeah.
But, so the whole talk is about getting into space. These guys want to get to space. They're trying to build the space shuttle to go to space, and it's not really your typical comic. It's more of like a story. But at the end of it, they finally have gotten to the point where they're in space and they're happy. But you realize that the society they live in, here comes your spoiler. So if you are reading this, stop. The society they're living in, it's still backwards, because they still have they still treat women like they would in like the 1800s, and they still treat people who are minorities like they would. So you kind of, in the very last few pages, realize like this is not that advanced of a society after all. They're advanced maybe technologically, but they're not, advanced socially. And that's the kind of thing they throw at you, or he throws at you, and you're just like, oh, okay, fair enough. I mean, he does it in a lot of things. He did it at the end of, I think the ending of Transmet kind of had an ending that people didn't necessarily expect. I don't think it was one people didn't want, but they didn't expect. They expected something more.
I need to get to the end of that.
Yeah, it's only 60 issues, I think.
Yeah, let me go ahead and down that tomorrow.
Didn't we talk about how much negative space he has? It should be easy.
Yeah.
The thing with Transmet, though, is when you read it, that there's so much, the art has so much going on, you want to look in all the art to see what Derek Robertson's hidden in there.
Right. Like I said, he's an artist I really like, and the cityscapes and all look really good.
Yeah. But so, yeah, I think if you are a fan of Warren Ellis, or you've never really read anything by Warren Ellis, that you should probably check out. You should probably check out Trees, because it's pretty good. If you do not like Warren Ellis, you probably will not like this.
Yeah, and I really hate to... I usually tell people, don't just discount a book because it's got an author you do or don't like, but sometimes it's so much that person that I can just go ahead and save you the trouble if you don't like it. But if you're a fan of just kind of really cool like sci-fi settings and character-driven plot, it really... This looks like it could be up your alley.
Yeah, I agree. So there you go. Trees. Check it out. Or don't. 420blazeit, man.
Well, okay. All right. So you told me you had something you wanted to discuss for the video game side.
Yeah. So, we're kind of off at E3. And I think it's still, most people will still say that the Xbox One is not living up to what Microsoft expected from it. The numbers show it's not, probably. But I think that they've done a lot that's caused some problems. And it's probably caused some problems from developers. Now, with that said, one of the Xbox One's exclusive launch titles was from Crytek, and it was Rise. Okay? And now it's being said that Crytek's buying into the next generation of consoles and investing so much into it, this might possibly be resulting in a collapse in Crytek and resulting in their bankruptcy.
Which sounds kind of crazy.
It does, considering that they've had some pretty big stuff come out of it. But the problem with Crytek is that they originally were all about PCs. They had Crysis was on there, and Far Cry was originally on there.
Yep. And
then in 2008, they basically were just PCs have too many pirates, and the money train's on the consoles, so we're heading that direction. Choo-choo, all aboard. And...
Please tell me that's exactly how they said that.
That's pretty much what they said. And the problem then is that they've gone to these consoles and they've bought in, and they went all for the Xbox One, which happened to be the weakest of the consoles and not the the one that's had the weakest sales to top it off.
Yeah, and what you mean by weakest of the consoles is it has the less processing power and stats.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that much less, but comparatively to the PS4, it's the lesser of the two.
Sure.
Which is even worse considering that Crytek was also talking about how next-gen consoles were weak, and they weren't really that great. And then they went in but on that one. So, I mean, I've never really been a big fan of most of the Crytek stuff. Like, I've played Far Cry, and it's good. I never played any of the Crysis because I didn't have a computer strong enough to.
Right. I got really lucky. I happened to get a computer when, a new computer, when Far Cry was still kind of new, but was cheap enough to where it wasn't that expensive. And it looked great. I mean, at the time, that was some of the best water graphics you had ever seen,
Yeah. But, there's another side of it, too, is that some of the other games they've made, like Warface, was only successful in Russia. Like, it didn't sell worth a flip anywhere else.
Right.
And then Crytek created their engine. What did they call it?
It's the Cry engine.
The Cry engine?
Yeah.
And it's had very weak adoption rate. Like, no one is jumping on board it. Everybody's just kind of like, bah.
Unless you want to make one of the prettiest games out there, because the Cry engine is a resource hog. It's, they wanted to get as much out of it as they can. And I think I told you this before that, Crytek's one of those companies that's like, why, if you can do it, there's that responsibility thing. It's like, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. Well, they're one of the ones that's, we can do it, so let's make this game. Let's make this, light extra bright, and let's do all this extra reflection stuff and all that, which is cool. It looks neat. But as someone who's played the first and the second Crysis games, that what stinks is that there's no story,
Yeah, oh yeah, they're glorified tech demos.
Yeah, and so it's like, I guess that was fun to look at. Yeah, I watched some of Rise on YouTube because I don't have an Xbox One.
Yeah.
And it just didn't interest me. It looked like a lot of quick time events. It just looked like a lot of stuff. Like you said, it looked like it was very showy. And that's what Microsoft wanted, I'm sure. They're like, we need a game that's going to make our system look awesome. But most people know, if you've been buying consoles for a while, when a brand new console comes out, you're still going to have like a year to a year and a half where the games are going to look just a little bit more polished and a little bit prettier. But until these developers have time to work with the systems and have time to kind of figure out what they can do with it and break everything, you're not going to get the really amazing looking games. I think in about a year you'll see those.
I agree with that. Now, the other problem, though, with this generation of consoles is they're just not that much more powerful than the previous generation. So I really don't think you're ever going to see like those huge changes. Like, I mean, you can look at a PlayStation 1 and look at a PS2 and be like, holy crap. Especially if you look at... You can look at early PS2 and late PS2 and be like, holy crap. And you can do the same thing with the PS3 and PS4 and be like, these early games compared to these later games, this is a big difference. I don't see it being as big a difference this generation. But then again, it's probably going to be 5 years anyways from what everybody's saying.
Right. As we've discussed on earlier episodes, every time we've jumped consoles, the difference in the tech has gotten a little bit less and a little bit less. And this one is the same. And now they're talking about the way they're talking right now, and things could change. This is going to be the shortest console generation to date between the current gen and the next gen. And so, that's pretty crazy when we think about it. And the jump's going to be even less because of that. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do with it. But I'm not surprised that they put. It looks like Microsoft really put a lot of money or a lot of eggs into one basket, and it just didn't pan out. And now it seems like this company is suffering for it.
Well, I don't think they're suffering for what Microsoft did. They're suffering for what they did. They're the ones who chose to do that. They had the PC games going on. They were making money there, but then they were decided, well, we don't want to be on the PC anymore because everybody pirates over here. And there's more money on the consoles, so we're going to go to the consoles. Even though the consoles, as they said, were not as powerful as the PC, so they had to hold back. And then they went to the console. They threw all their eggs into one basket by going to one system with one game that's nothing but a glorified tech demo. and it bit him in the butt.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that like these guys, didn't do. Definitely, from everything I've read, this company is kind of full of itself.
Yeah, F this company.
But my thing is also, I think Microsoft in some ways, probably knowing how businesses work, they were like, "Oh, come and do this game for us. It'll be great. We'll have a few laughs, or whatever the line is." But my point to that is, I think what I'm trying to say is that Microsoft was probably putting a lot on this, and then when it didn't work the way they wanted it, Microsoft probably also didn't really care too much for Crytek's situation. I don't think they have any sympathy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel as bad for Crytek as I do for a company like Harmonix that they kind of screwed over, where basically they were like, "Hey, every one of our consoles is going to have the Kinect. We want you to make games that use the Kinect." Harmonix is like, "Sure, all our games will use the Kinect." And then suddenly they're like, "You know what? Because the Kinect is hated by everybody, we're not going to sell consoles with it anymore." So then Harmonix is like, "What the F, Microsoft? That was what you told us and promised us, and now half the people aren't going to have them because people aren't going to be buying the expensive system when they get the cheaper one. They don't need it." Yeah. And so that's probably why, like I said before, Harmonix probably got to go on stage and talk about games that no one's going to buy anyways at E3, because Microsoft probably felt bad for getting them in trouble, and they probably pitched a fit. Well, they did. They pitched a fit on their Twitter account.
Yeah, I heard they tweeted some stuff about it. I didn't go read it.
Oh, yeah. They basically tweeted, what the F?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I agree. Like I said, I feel bad for Harmonix because if somebody tells you,
they didn't tell Harmonix we're going to do this. They just did it, and Harmonix found out when everybody else did.
Yeah. If somebody tells you, "Hey, this is going to be the way it is," and so you base an entire, I won't say a business model, but an entire plan of action on that, and then, like you said, they just kind of drop that bomb on you. Oh, by the way. Because I agree, now that I don't need to own a Kinect, if I do go and buy an Xbox One, I'm not going to buy the one with the Kinect. One, all the stuff about it spying on you aside and everything like that, you can have your opinions on that.
Yeah.
But I'm never going to use it. I'm not going to use the Kinect for, most everybody I know uses the Kinect for the kind of lazy functions of it, or the kind of, just wipe my hand and go through Netflix or whatever. That doesn't interest me, and it's $100 extra, and in 360, in that generation, and with the PS3 move, I never found a game that I thought was worth buying the extra part to do it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And I don't think this console is going to be any different.
No, and I agree with that too. But there's a little bit more to this Crytek thing too. So like, there's this whole ordeal with them. Everybody claiming that they're looking at going bankrupt, and in fact, a company called Wargaming, which is this free-to-play game developer, which is what last thing we needed more of, but is looking at trying to purchase them. Well, Crytek disputes all this. They're like, "Nope, this isn't true. We're A-okay. We don't have any kind of problems. We are not going out of business or going bankrupt. We're still working on all these games that you've never heard of and you probably don't care about. It's all right."
Wait, was that in the memo, or is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. Everybody's
okay.
This is what they said. They're like, "Regardless of what some media are reporting, mostly based on a recent article published by GameStar, the information in those reports and in the GameStar article itself are rumors which Crytek deny. We continue to focus on the development and publishing of our upcoming titles, Homefront: The Revolution, Hunt, Horrors of the Gilded Age, Arena, Fate, and Warface, as well as providing ongoing support for our Cry engine and its licenses."
Now,
or licensees.
Yeah. Homefront, they did show off at E3, and I played the first one, so I'm kind of interested in this one, but not enough. It's not a system seller, and it's not.
Yeah.
It's not going to be anything brand new. It's the whole idea is somebody saw Red Dawn, so they hired the guy who wrote Red Dawn to write them a video game, which is true, and now this Homefront's what you got, because you basically are fighting from a Korea and large Asian-based army that have taken over the United States, and that's the game out of all those you just listed. It's the only one I know anything about.
Yeah. Now, they said this on the 24th of June. Okay. Now, the other article I was talking about them going bankrupt, that came out about a week and a half ago. This article here, where they deny it, was the 24th of June. Now, on the 26th of June, information's come out saying that there's a number of staff at Crytek's UK office who have not been paid their full salary since April 16th of this year.
I'm sorry, did you say since April?
Yeah, April 16th. So almost 2 months they haven't been paid their full salary.
Wow.
And supposedly, like, Crytek, while they might not be planning on going bankrupt, they are planning on trying to get money from Deutsche Bank, which is a big bank over in Europe.
Sure.
To keep going. So, I mean, tell me they're not struggling. They might be planning on still doing stuff.
Yeah.
But you can't say, we're not struggling when you haven't paid your employees and you're looking to get a loan to keep going.
That actually sounds like they're doing the, what's it called, reallocations or whatever. And so what they're probably going to do is end up firing a bunch of people. And I hate to say that, but that's what it sounds like.
Yeah. And you know, I'm still going to say this is all rumors to this point. But it's multiple rumors coming out. It's not like one guy in the corner shouting this. It's like all these different people over in Europe are like, yeah, no, this is really going on, and these people aren't getting paid. These people are doing bad, and they're looking at this other company to buy them, and blah, 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 blah. So,
yeah, sure.
I mean, there's even if part of it's not true, there's got to be some legitimacy in some of this.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So there you go, Crytek. I don't think they own any of those good games anymore.
Also,
they don't own Far Cry. I know that. That's Ubisoft now.
That's Ubisoft, yeah. I would also like, just as if any of our viewers have actually played the Crysis games or any of Crytek's games, just let me know, because I'm just curious. It's more like an informal poll.
Yeah, because I don't think I've ever played any of their games. Like, I played Far Cry, but I didn't play Far Cry when it was owned by them.
Yeah.
Well, and the Crysis games, I never owned a computer powerful enough when they came out to play, and by the time I did have one, I was like, well, there's probably better stuff looking now. So I didn't play them.
Yeah. I will say this. Those games even look pretty good. I ended up playing one of them on the PS3, and they even look good for, PS3 when you didn't have the maximized computer, where you could maximize everything and all.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that was one of the most boring games I ever played. Like, the combat wasn't bad, but it just wasn't very, creative. And
their games were glorified tech demos with gameplay.
The only part of the storyline that really got me interested is they introduced this character. I'm like, that's a really cool character. And 5 minutes later, that character dies. And I was like, well, I'm done.
Wow.
Yeah. So
there you go, Crysis. Maybe it'll be around in a year. Maybe it won't.
Maybe not, yeah.
There's another thing, too, I forgot to mention about them.
Okay.
So, they did announce they canceled development of Rise 2.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
So, it's kind of like, hey, that tech demo we made for the Xbox One when it first came out but sold it as a game? We're going to make a second tech demo, but we're not anymore. Because we'd actually have to put gameplay in it, and that's just like work, and we're not doing it.
You really are against this company, aren't you?
I think I'm going to read this. This is basically the too long didn't read of this whole story. And I think this sums this company up perfectly.
Okay.
Crytek chased the imaginary money train to the consoles. They mocked the consoles for not being powerful, but then they became hypocrites when they cuddled to the worst selling and less powerful console, and now they're surprised their game didn't sell well. Their engine isn't selling either in an age of cheapo professional engines, and now they're bankrupt for ignoring their own advice on the Xbone. That sums up Crytek.
That is a summarization of what we just talked about, yes.
So in the words of Warren Ellis, F them. Actually, there'd be a lot more like expletives and other things that I probably shouldn't be saying.
Right.
But yeah, I don't really have any care for this company. They weren't making good games. They were making pretty tech demos. That really what they should have been doing is just focusing and making some amazing engine and selling it. But like this said, everybody has an engine now, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's not like how it used to be where it was like everybody's waiting for the next Unreal Engine.
Yeah. There was definitely a time not too long ago where having your own engine was, you could sell an engine.
Yeah, that was you license it and just make a crap ton of money on it.
Yeah.
But that's a thing of the past. It doesn't work like that anymore.
Right. Well, I know you were asking me, or maybe you weren't, but I'm going to tell you. You were asking me, Steven, what have you been doing with all your time lately? And part of
420blazeit. That's what you've been doing, right?
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anyway, so what I have been doing is watching a lot of streaming speedruns. And for those of you who don't know what speedruns are, a very brief summation of that is people who take these games and they practice them over and over again. They find glitches. They find the best strats. Sometimes it's as simple as realizing that Link runs faster if you go backwards instead of forwards. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's finding ways to break the game and jump over walls. Like in Ocarina of Time, there's a wall that will literally, if you can get the boss to hit you over it, it'll send you from the first level or the first boss of the game to the last boss of the game.
Yeah.
So
it's basically going through a game as fast as you can, and sometimes you can go. Sometimes it involves using glitches, and sometimes it just involves knowing the best routes and shortcuts and things to do.
And there are different modes. Like some people, Mega Man X is one of my favorite games ever, and there's a speed run of Mega Man X that can be done in I think 16 minutes or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then if you want to do a 100% run, which is where you have to get every power up and every piece of the armor and stuff like that, there's a strat for doing that. And so it's really kind of interesting. It's not necessarily great for if you want to learn how to play the game and need to know how to beat a boss, because these guys are so good sometimes that the boss doesn't live long enough for you to really have an explanation or anything. Mm-hmm. But really interesting stuff. And for some people, this may seem like the most boring thing on the planet. But for me, I have been watching what's called Summer Games Done Quick. And this is something that they do twice a year, because the other one is just Awesome Games Done Quick, I believe.
I think so.
And that one's in January. But they just wrapped up Summer Games Done Quick. And what that is they were streaming all these speed runs of multitudes of different games and raising money. People would donate, and they would donate and do incentives. So like if we get enough money donated, this next runner will do this run blindfold. Or people would make challenges in their donations, like I'm going to donate $25, but I'll donate another $25 if you can do this next stage without dying, or if you can do it one-handed. Yeah. So really interesting stuff for a good cause. It was for Doctors Without Borders, which is a good charity to go towards. Yeah. And then they had a lot of other things they were donating to and things they were building up to. If you donated, there were prizes you could win and stuff like that. It's just a really cool thing. But what really amazed me about this is they're sitting here showing off all these skills, and I'm learning about things I didn't know about. I found a couple of new games. There were some Japan only released Castlevania spin-off games and stuff like that I didn't know about. There's a Tails game for Sonic, and Tails. I didn't know Tails had his own island adventure game.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. But what really got me was that they were finding glitches. Even Sonic 2 was one they found a new glitch on. And they found a new glitch, and this game is 25 years old.
Oh, yeah.
But also a couple of people, I think it was 2 people, one I know for Mario, they broke new world records. There were 2 people that broke new world records doing it also.
And see, that's awesome, is when you get to see stuff like that happen. I mean, sometimes that will happen at these events, and sometimes it's just streamers who all they do is stream that kind of stuff, and they get lucky and they happen to break a record during that time. Yeah. But most of those records aren't being broken by large amounts. It's by they're shaving off a few seconds, right?
Yes, yeah.
It's I did this 2 seconds faster than the previous fastest time.
The guy who broke the Mario record literally broke it by half a second.
Yeah,
but he broke it, And I love how many of these streamers talk about how I broke this record when I was drunk playing one night, but I wasn't recording, so
yeah. And so, I think it's cool that the gaming industry comes together, or not even industry, it's fans come together and they create these charity events around stuff like that, like the speed running. There's another speedrunner. I don't know if he holds any records, but I know he's part of the speedrunning community named MC Gamer or Super MC Gamer.
Right.
And he does a charity stream called Zeldathon. I think it happens twice a year also. Mm-hmm. And what Zeldathon is basically him and his friends have gotten together and they will just play Zelda games for 24/7 for 5 or 6 days in a row, just taking donations. And they'll do the incentive stuff like you talk about, but it'll be like, hey, if we can hit $1,000 within the next 3 hours, this guy's going to shave his head. Or if you donate $10, we'll spin a wheel of punishments, is what they call them. And based on the punishment or what the wheel lands on, it will be something we have to do. Like maybe the punishment is you have to play through the next room standing on one foot. Maybe you have to play through the next room with your controller on your head. Or maybe you have to share the controller with the guy next to you when you play through the next room. So, and they're not necessarily stream running, but they're doing games for charity.
Yeah. And I don't know, like, some of it's really cool. Like, there's the Desert Bus of Hope.
Yeah, that's another one.
If you've never seen Desert Bus or never heard of it, look it up. It is the most boring game in existence, but it was kind of meant as a spoof because it was from Penn and Teller. But they actually do a Desert Bus of Hope run, and they donate money based off how long and they can go and how many points they can get. And you can't truly understand how incredible that is until you know more about the game.
Yeah.
But it's awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ones like that, and some are really big, like the Summer Games Done Quickly one's one of the bigger ones, as is Zeldathon's pretty big, and there's a Mario one too. It's not as big, and then there's like other things that like involve games that aren't speedrunning, and they're not even just playing through a series. They're like, hey, we're gonna design a game in 3 days, and if you donate, certain things, like maybe you'll get to name a character, or maybe you'll get to decide something about the game. Like I know, Mojang, who make Minecraft, were part of a thing like that once. And so, I mean, to me, it's cool just to see the community coming together for different reasons to donate to charities. And, I mean, you said the Summer Games did Doctors Without Borders. I know Zeldathon's done St. Jude's, and they've done Child's Play and stuff like that.
A lot of them actually do Child's Play, which is cool. That's
Child's Play is a huge one. For people who don't know what Child's Play is Child's Play is they basically donate games to kids who are in hospitals so they have something to do. Kids who are stuck in hospitals. And sometimes it's like maybe a mother or father stuck in there and the kid has to stay in one of these houses that's attached to it. So they'll donate games to the kids so they have something to do. And it's not always video games. Sometimes it's board games and stuff like that.
Right.
But that's another good charity.
Not to be confused with Chucky.
Yeah, no, they're not donating those horrible old dolls to people.
Was it My Buddies or something like that?
Yeah. But yeah, so you should probably keep an eye out. Truthfully, the best way to find out about them is just Twitch.
Yeah.
Just
like
most
if you of these people stream on Twitch.
Yeah, and you'll see you can always tell when there's some big event going on Twitch, because if you look at like what are the top channels now, it's usually going to be in the top 10.
Sure.
So it's not League of Legends or something. And
I am proud to say, like, for online communities, a lot of times you get really, just tired of the negativity in it. But for SGDQ, they seem to have a really good community. Everybody was pitching in. Even the people in the chat were doing stuff. It was really cool. It was a good experience. I had watched speedruns before, but seeing them done live and just it was a very neat experience.
Yeah,
don't expect me to start speedrunning anytime soon. But
yeah, no, I don't have the patience to learn how to do it, so it isn't likely to happen to me either.
Yeah, and what's kind of cool is I like how these people admit, like, they'll go do a trick and they'll like, oh, well, actually, Rafflecopter 64 found that glitch, and they'll be like, and I started doing, and you can tell they're a pretty tight community.
Oh yeah, they all know when somebody came up with something. They'll be like, oh yeah, that was found by so and so. It's become known as this. Some of the glitches are named after the people who found them. Yeah,
it's crazy to me. They do races too. And so, like, they had two people racing Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which is a great game if you've never played it. But it's one of those games that there's so much to it. And both people were racing, and they were both using completely different strategies because both of them had been proven strategies to be very quick. And, stuff like that was just really, really neat. They did several races, actually, where two people would start a game. They did a 4-way Mega Man X2 race, which was just hilarious. Also, you missed out on the So they played Final Fantasy VI, and they did it 2-player, I think. I can't remember exactly how they did it. But when they get to the opera, there were 4 people on the couch, and all 4 people started singing the opera. Hilarious.
That's awesome. Well, there you go, guys. So like I said, check out Twitch for any of them. And if there's some of them that pop up that we know about before they occur, we'll let you guys know. So if you are interested in checking out any of these charity streams, whether it be for speedrunning or just people sitting down playing, Pong for 24 hours straight or whatever it is, we'll let you know.
Yeah. I would need to be high to play Pong for 24 hours straight.
Yeah, 420blazeit most definitely on that one. I don't think I could even play.
Favorite phrase, isn't it?
No, it just fits in because we talked about trees, and that's that community is what they call it.
Is that the first thing you think of when you hear trees?
Yeah, kind of, and Warren Ellis, because then I think to the story of Alan Moore and his pot farm.
Yeah, that is true. I'll give you that.
I'll just to quick close that out. The whole story is that supposedly when Alan Moore had the rights to a lot of his stories that were published in Britain, bought by DC. To spite them, he took all the money and purchased a giant pot farm in England that he still lives on.
Where he worships his snake god.
Where he worships his Roman snake god, which is another story for another time.
Yeah.
But if you have any questions for us, you can email us at comicsandcontrollers@gmail.com. If you would like to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter at ZombieJesus here. Where can they follow you at, Stephen?
At Stephen Wilds on Twitter.
All right. So until next time, I'm Kyle.
And I'm Steven.
You guys have a good one.